The conversion from right to left was a plan generated over many years. We knew eventually, because of Saudi Arabia's rule, that we would need to do it. And we started saving in about 2019 to enable us to pay for the conversion. We have a fixed income like any traveller, and some travellers wouldn't be able to afford it. But we saved for 4 years to enable us to do the conversion, and we knew that we needed to come to Saudi. The way that we got to Saudi changed because we were going to come from Sudan, but the Sudanese conflict changed the route and we ended up shipping into Oman. So we saved the money and we converted the car. So what's it like driving on the opposite car? Well, for the first 4 months it was very, very strange. I've been driving on the opposite side of the car for many years in the same car. We've had a Land Rover for a very long time. We've had this one since 2015. And I've been driving on the other side of the car with my arm out the window, as Land Rover drivers do, getting a suntan on my right arm. And now I get a suntan on my left arm. Ordinarily, if we weren't videoing, I would have the window open because this car has got no air conditioning. Quite luckily, because otherwise we would have had to switch that across as well when we did the conversion. So it took me 4 months to get used to this. But what didn't take me 4 months to get used to is driving on the opposite side of the road.
As part of the conversion to left-hand drive, a lot of things within the engine bay needed changing. One of the things is the heater blower, which generates the hot air that comes out on the windscreen to demist it on cold mornings. In Saudi Arabia, we don't have many of those. And the other thing that needed converting or moving across was the brake servo. Of course, when the pedals move from the left to the right, the pedals need to move. So the brake servo that controls the brake was moved from the left to the right. The unit, the blower unit, is quite a big job. That needed an entire new unit because it's the other way around completely, and it's not just a switch of moving the whole old one from our car to this side. It needed a whole new unit. And in Angola they used 5 donor vehicles to move things across from those older cars into this one. They were the same model. Some of them were newer models with less kilometers. They'd been in accidents and such, and they took the best parts off all of 5 cars to move over to this. Underneath as well, there is the steering. There is a power steering unit that uses hydraulics to enable it to be easier to steer, such a big car. And that is on this side of the car on a right-hand drive, and on a left-hand drive it's on this side of the car. It's a completely different unit. And the wheel on this side and this side needed changing. The housing on this side is connected to the steering and it wasn't there. So you had to change the whole hub that the wheel connects to the axle. It's a big job. That's the reason it took 6 days. That's the reason it cost €2,800. And as I've said before, the only reason we did it was to come to Saudi Arabia.
Assume the position. I'm on the left-hand side of the car. So how many countries are there that drive with left-hand side steering? Well, it's 35% for right-hand drive, so 65% for left-hand drive. So for right-hand drive, that's 76 countries. 76 countries driving on the right-hand side with their neighbours likely on the other side of the car. And when you go over the border, as we do all the time in England, going over to France, we switch sides of the road. Nothing unsafe, nothing unusual, we all do it all the time. We actually think that the reason that they don't allow right-hand drive cars in left-hand drive countries is the tendency of people to try and permanently import right-hand drive cars from Japan, because they are cheaper, into left-hand drive countries. This happens quite a lot in Africa. And when they write the law, they write it in such a way that they just basically ban right-hand drive. But unfortunately, as part of that, it doesn't differentiate between temporary import and permanent import. And tourists like us, overlanders, are temporary imports. But if the legislation doesn't differentiate, they ban everything. And we think this is what's happened in Saudi Arabia. They've just got legislation within their legal system that says no right-hand drive. And you can imagine that a customs officer at the border would see a right-hand drive car and just say, no, the law says you can't come in. And this is perfectly logical. Being an overlander, we travel under what they call a triptyque here, or trip ticket, which is a carnet de passage. And this is part of international law. It's part of the Istanbul Convention, actually, and it's a very old convention which was revised, I think, sometime in the 90s. And this is a sort of a passport for the car that allows you to take a foreign vehicle with a customs bond that almost guarantees you are going to bring the car into the country and then leave again. And if you don't leave again, you lose your customs bond. And in some instances, the customs bond can be quite significant. And you deposit this with the local automobile association, typically within your home country. There are other ways of doing it with private companies, but typically it's deposited with the automobile associations around the world within your home country. And it amounts to a percentage of the true value of the car. For some countries, this percentage is 300, 500 or 800% of the value of the car. So you can imagine that's a significant deposit. When an overlander comes into a place like Saudi Arabia, they spend money for an extended period of time. They're not like a normal tourist. A normal tourist would come in for 1 week or 2 weeks and potentially spend a lot of money, but they will deposit a lot of that money with big hotels, in fancy restaurants, in the main tourist attractions. When an overlander comes in, we sometimes come in for many months. In Saudi Arabia, the visa is for 3 months. So we will be spending money all over the country in places that an ordinary tourist would not spend it. When we're here for 3 months, we probably spend more than a high-end tourist. It's spread over 3 months, but we spend it for a much longer period. So whereas a normal tourist may come in and spend a couple of $1,000 or maybe more than that in 2 weeks, we spend a couple of $1,000 or more than that over 3 months. The same amount of money, but it's spread and spent differently. We eat in local restaurants, we stay in local smaller hotels if we use hotels like the motorcyclists do, and it's distributed to a much wider audience. We go to places that a high-end tourist would never ever go to. We also spend a lot of money on fuel. High-end tourists don't do that. We drive thousands of kilometers within a country like Saudi Arabia because it's huge and it gets spread everywhere. We've been to the four corners, if you can say that, of Saudi Arabia on our trip, and we've only been here a month and a half. We're going to be here a little bit longer. We're leaving and coming back, and we'll spend even more money. They have some big trains in Saudi Arabia. This is probably twice the length of the ones in UK, with 2 containers on each unit. Big train. One of the reasons that we came to Saudi Arabia was to watch the Dakar. The last time we saw the Dakar was 2013 in South America, and we really wanted to see it again. So the conversion from right to left was part of the reason, just so we could see the Dakar. But Saudi Arabia, to get the Dakar in May 2016, signed a document, a UN convention called the Convention on Road Traffic. The 1968 Vienna Convention on Road Traffic, to be specific. And to get the Dakar, they must sign this document, because officially and legally under international law, you need to be a signatory of this legislation. It's international law to enable vehicles legally to come internationally from other countries into your country. And they signed it in 2016. Within that convention, there is Article 52. And Article 52 says that a steering wheel needs to be attached to the vehicle securely and firmly to enable you to change direction. It doesn't say it needs to be on the right half of the car or the left of the car. It just says you need to have a steering mechanism. It doesn't even mention wheel, because of course motorcycles don't have a steering wheel on the left or the right. They don't even have a wheel, they have handlebars. So it calls it a steering mechanism. So as part of them signing that document, they legally permitted vehicles with steering wheels firmly attached to the car to enter their country. Now, what they didn't do as part of this is potentially change any domestic legislation which forbid the import. And again, I mentioned this earlier, temporary import or permanent import is not usually defined. They forbid the import of right-hand drive vehicles. Well, they permitted the import temporarily within the Vienna Convention on Road Traffic of right-hand drive vehicles by agreeing to that legislation and that convention. So there is really no legal reason why they can't permit temporary import, as the Vienna Convention is designed to permit, the vehicles with the steering wheel or steering, whatever, not a wheel, maybe handlebars in some of the electric cars, I don't know, from the other side of the car. We've mentioned the safety aspect. We've all driven on both sides of the road, and the steering being on the other side is irrelevant. What Saudi did is they permitted it legally. So they do have the framework in place to allow it. What I'm wanting is for them to legally permit it and officially permit it. And what we need is those people involved within the government in Saudi Arabia is to support overlanding and tourism, which is a huge thing at the moment, and to support the organisation that I work with, the Overlanding Association, and to give us a letter permitting overlanders, whether that be by permission through the Overlanding Association or just all overlanders, to come into Saudi Arabia to see this great country.